evening. You're very welcome to this week's episode of Centre Ground on the Irish Inquiry. And tonight, the spotlight is on the hidden giveaway of the remaining state assets that we have. And my guests are Dr. Finbar Markey. Many of you will know Finbar. He is the presenter of Thursday night's programme on the Irish Inquiry, Double Down. And Finbar has been studying the bill that's currently going through the Dáil to establish the Land Development Agency. Tom O'Callaghan is the chair of the Irish Postmasters Group, and he will be chatting to me about what he sees as major issues that are coming down the line for the country's post offices. And finally, Seamus Maye. Many of you will know Seamus. He has appeared before on the Irish Inquiry. Seamus is the director of the International Small Business Alliance, and he is going to be speaking about banking, our banking system. And as always, in the second half of the programme, Dr. Peter Dunn will be introducing the hot topic of the week. But before we begin, as always, I invite you to go to the Irish Inquiry website, and there's a drop-down box there where you can enter in details of how you can help us with your technical skills, or alternatively, you might like to make a small donation towards the Irish Inquiry platform. We don't have any advertising or any sponsorship, but it does take money to keep the platform afloat. And so to tonight's programme. As I have said, the spotlight is on the hidden giveaway of the country's remaining state assets. And here to talk about this is Dr. Finbar Markey. Finbar, you're very welcome back to Centre Ground.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be on the show again. Can I just maybe clarify that although I have a PhD, it's not relevant to the subject matter tonight, that I am an activist and a citizen journalist, and that's where I'm coming from when it comes to the Land Development Agency bill.
Okay, so you have been doing a great deal of research on the LDA bill. So it's over to you now, Finbar, to tell us about it.
I think, Anna, before first of all going into any detail about the bill, and I do want to go through the different parts of it, I want to characterize it, if that's possible, first. And to characterize it simply, it is the giveaway, and I mean the giveaway, of the material existence of the state that is the Republic of Ireland era. The history of the existence of the state, nothing so shocking has been presented before Dáil era and before. This bill in itself is quite a small piece of legislation. It's 56 pages. Take away the contents list and intros and things like that, you're talking about 48 pages of text. But in that 48 pages, literally everything that it comprises, the material existence of the state, is to be given away, or at least, well, the option exists now to be given away to private interests for the profit of private developers. And this has been being done under two guises. The first guise is the guise of the housing and the homelessness crisis. So what they're doing is, when we look at the introduction to this bill, it lists out about 20 purposes. And each purpose is just a repeat: social housing, build more housing. It also talks in one of those purposes about integrating different social classes together. Just even the idea that they're using that kind of language, where people from different social backgrounds together. But ultimately, it's using the guise of the housing crisis to privatise the entire state, so that the state of Ireland, as a materially valued state, will not exist anymore. Secondly, it's been done under the guise of COVID and COVID regulations. The whole country is talking about COVID. You go onto the news, you go onto anything, it's COVID, COVID, COVID. And yet bills like this, and the affordable housing bill, which has also been introduced to the Dáil, which I mentioned, and collectively, this is a direct head-on attack on the concept of the public good. From now on, the public good means for private developers. It's just shocking that it's being introduced, Anna. So that's a characterization. Before I go into detail, I do have a clip here, if you don't mind, Anna, me running this clip of Richard Boyd Barrett in the Dáil last week, again characterizing this bill. If you have that clip there, please, Stephen.
Wow is all I can say. I don't know whether to laugh or cry when I listen to the government spokespeople. Of course, the minister has left the building like Elvis Presley, but the boys are back in town. That's all I can say. The boys are back in town, as Phil Lynott put it, Fianna Fáil and the developers. And I just find it absolutely shocking beyond belief that we have government people accusing the opposition of ideology. It is utterly laughable, and we mustn't repeat the mistakes of the past. This is a souped-up, hyper-speed version of the mistakes of the past, this legislation. It is a heist. It is the legal mechanism to pillage the land bank, the entire public land bank. It's absolutely extraordinary. Every single public body, not just the local authorities, and every bit of their land, not just their housing land, any relevant land. Look at the definition. They can take any bit of land from any public body, and they can do what they like with it.
Okay, so that was Richard Boyd Barrett, Anna. Do you mind if I just go into a brief on what Richard Boyd Barrett really means and what this bill means by public bodies and public lands?
Can I just hold you there?
Yeah, that's okay.
Because that is my first time to see that clip, and I actually was just taking notes as he was speaking. And he actually says that it is a legal method to pillage the land of the country. I mean, that is quite shocking, and that is quite frightening.
Yeah, but it's not, when we think of land, we're thinking local authority, council land. It goes far beyond that. The first part of the bill defines what public lands and public bodies are. And the agency that is being created, this commercial agency, which is a private company limited by shares, it has defined what public lands and bodies are, and any lands, any buildings, anything belonging to these bodies in Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 are open to be just taken, essentially. And I use that word taken, and I'll explain why I don't say sold in a minute. So the Education and Training Board,
Finbar, sorry.
Services, DigiHub Development Agency, Dublin Institute of Studies, Enterprise Ireland, Environmental Protection Agency, Garda Síochána, Grange Gorman, Oberstein Children Detention, National Archives, Ordnance Survey Ireland, Sports Ireland, State Laboratory, Teagasc, all the technical institutions and universities on service, Idirchlis Lenuha, August Shalona, Culture, Curson Pereiran, the DAA, it goes on and on. Any land, any buildings owned by these public bodies.
Finbar, is culture included in that? And Bord na Móna, the land culture and the land owned by Bord na Móna?
All public bodies. Anything that's considered to be a public body is now being handed over the authority and control to this new agency.
But culture together with Bord na Móna own the largest land bank in the country. And are you telling me that their land comes under the remit of this new agency?
I am. But what I'm saying is, although the Bord na Móna land may now be considered to be designated for a particular purpose, the Land Development Agency, when I go into the details of some of this, it has such a broad and loose remit, it can undo anything, literally anything. The powers that 2 years ago. So the agency itself is in existence for 2 years, but the powers that are now being conveyed onto this agency through this bill is what's really, really shocking. In terms of what this agency is, it's a DAC, private company limited by shares, which means it's a designated activity company. So it's a private company that can enter into commercial activities with third parties and fourth parties if needs be. One of the concerns with that is that it makes it less accountable to the state, because they will be able to say that all of its commercial business is actually not open to FOI, is sensitive information, etc. So what we're going to find is that apart from anything else, the DAC registration that the ministers will conduct will in effect shut down a lot of investigation into what this agency is actually doing. Part 6 is very limited in terms of accountability. You know, there's a reference, not in Part 6, but there is a reference to Dáil committees and things like that. But it would appear to me that it has to follow the Company Act Section 6 in terms of reporting its finances, but it can keep a lot of things very, very secret. I also noticed that when this agency has the power to purchase land, but when it talks about purchasing land, it's talking about private land. And when it's talking about public land, it uses the word acquire. Now, there is a provision that suggests to the reader that the agency will be buying land when it takes it off public bodies and public entities. However, the phrase that it actually uses, if I can just find this, is it says, shall be entitled to receive. It doesn't say the local authority or culture or wherever will be paid the market value. It says will be entitled to receive. And that's sneaky language, because I know what's going to happen. All the big deals that are done with this land, developers who will develop it at a profit. So in terms of the sneakiness of the bill, there's a big distinction when it talks about buying private land, which this agency will have a right to do as well, but it will acquire public lands. Anna, do you have anything to come in on that?
Well, to be very honest with you, Finbar, I am absolutely in shock, because I suppose I represent the ordinary people that are watching this tonight and are listening to you. And we had heard about the Land Development Agency, and as you say, you know, everybody is so preoccupied with COVID and so on. We didn't really know anything about it. And you actually, I know we mentioned that we were going to cover this topic, but we didn't go into it in any great detail. So I'm hearing this information for the first time tonight, and I'm, you know, I'm just, it's breaking my heart, and I'm wondering, you know, what can we do to stop it, given that Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party comprise a very large majority in the Dáil. It seems to be like the runaway train. There's nothing that we can do to stop it.
Okay. Well, Anna, I think you may put your heart over something soft like a cushion, because it may be about to get broken a little bit more. The bill also seems to redefine once more our understanding of the concept of affordable housing. So before Fine Gael deceived its way into government in 2011 and after the crash, you may remember the promises that they broke 24 hours after they got elected about burning bondholders and things like that. Well, back then they also redefined the understanding of social housing to mean private housing being leased by local authorities. It used to be that it would be local authority owned private houses and the public housing, and they built public housing. And people who were working class and middle class aspired to access public housing. It wasn't a shameful thing that our government makes it out to be these days. They changed that to in 2011-12, they changed the definition to be basically HAP, which maintained the housing prices at their outrageous rates, because it meant that local authorities were now willing to save all of these second and third home landlords and maintain the demands for rents that they were demanding. And so that, but now this bill goes one step further, and it once more redefines social housing. But now social housing means housing that is below the local market value. Now, that means that it's unaffordable to everybody. because it maintains the market value and in fact probably increases the market value. So a small proportion of the houses that are going to be developed by the Land Development Agency itself and its commercial entities all on board, a small percentage of those, I think altogether 40% are labelled as social housing, but only 10% will be in any way genuine social housing. And in terms of affordability, first of all, that percentage of how much housing will be affordable housing, as they call it, is down to the minister at any given time. So it's not, they didn't even have the kahunas or the authenticity to put down those percentages in the bill. That determined by the minister. But also in terms of what affordable housing itself is. At the moment, that if this bill goes through, affordable housing will now be housing that is still over 400 to 450,000 euros in Dublin for the average home or the median home. And it'll be the same for excessive rents again. So this bill is just going to further maintain housing costs. It's going to, instead of having a simple system where we get all of our local authorities together to identify 10 years ago, we end up with this complex, convoluted mess, which is going to involve hundreds of third-party developers. It's a mess. Instead of doing this simply and starting 10 years ago, we could be out of this housing crisis. But once more, and remember, this bill was originally introduced 2 years ago by Fine Gael and it fell on its face. Now Fianna Fáil, who criticised it then, have given it a new name and they're running with the thing unchanged. So that's how tactless and that's how insincere our government are with regards to solving the housing crisis.
So basically what we have here is a massive sellout by Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party. And I suppose it behoves all of us to create a massive outcry against what's happening. I'm just conscious of the time, Finbar.
Just one more thing, Anna, please, that I would like to touch on. Do I have one more minute, Anna?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say to you, Finbar. Just a few more minutes now, just to wind up what you think are the key salient points that people need to know. Okay.
Well, the key salient points of that bill are, as I outlined, it's the giveaway of the existence of the state to private entities and developers. It'll worsen the housing crisis. Alongside that bill, there's another bill just been introduced to the Dáil called the Affordable Housing Bill. And this is how this is going to be bankrolled to a certain. So the Affordable Housing Bill is introducing what's called shared equity loans. This was done in the UK over the last 10 to 15 years. It was an absolute mess. It drove up the cost of housing. It created ghettos and glitches and things like that. It was a complete failure. And our government, rather than learn the lessons from the UK, are now introducing shared equity housing. So there's two bills really passing together, and they're kind of attached in many ways. The bottom line is, Anna, we have to do something about it. These lockdown restrictions are going to be lifted soon because we need to get to Dublin, and the spring has been tightening and tightening on us for quite a while now. And we need to spring out of the box that we're in very soon and get up to Dublin and not leave the buildings of government until such time as they've scrapped this bill, because Thatcher would have been embarrassed and ashamed to introduce this bill. It is so extreme. They talk about extremist and extreme right wing. Fianna Fáil, this bill, are proving themselves to be extremist right wing economists, extremist to the most extreme degree that you can mention. I don't think any other state would get away with trying to bring this through houses of their government.
Well, just from listening to what you have said as a history teacher, it reminds me of the legislation that was passed in London to transfer ownership of the land of Ireland over to planters. And basically what I'm hearing tonight is that this is a bill being rushed through the Dáil under the cover of COVID when everybody is preoccupied, a bill that will allow an agency that's already in existence to take over the ownership of all of the property, all of the state property of Ireland, and transfer it to private developers and private owners for profit. You know, this is plantation, 21st century style. It's neo-colonialism. It's not an outside entity that's doing it. We're being sold on, we're being sold out by our own. Am I correct in saying that, Finbar?
I you know, quite often when we hear comparisons to the ending of the commonage, for instance, or the plantations, it's exaggerated. But I would say in this context, it is a fair comparison in terms of the significance and the import of what this bill does, because it's undoable. When you go into a court case in a situation where land has been sold on to a third party, you may dispute with the two original parties, you and somebody else. But the person that bought the land from the other guy that you're disputing the land, generally in legal terms, he's not to suffer. He doesn't have to hand the land back. It would be a compensation that would be paid out. So what the point I'm making is there's no undoing this. There's no undoing after the event of so we have to act now, and we have to act soon.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much, Finbar, for that. I know that you have spent a great deal of time this week researching and studying the bill line by line. I know that you were doing that, and I want to thank you for that, and we'll be coming back to you again in the second part of the programme.
Thank you, Anna.
It gives me pleasure now to welcome to the first time to Centre Ground Tom O'Callaghan, who is the chair of the Independent Postmasters Group. You're very welcome, Tom.
Hello, Anna, how are you? Thank you for inviting me here tonight.
Tom, you were on the radio earlier today. So can you tell our listeners and our viewers here on Centre Ground what you had to say?
Well, I suppose firstly I'll try and introduce myself. I'm a postmaster for more than 20 years in Limerick City. Before that, my role was as a retail advisor for a large cash and carry group. And, you know, over the last number of years, within a post office, we saw ourselves being part of the community, and we thought that we were going into an area where we were going to be part and needed as a public service outlet for many ways, for being a government front office, potentially to be able to pay your bills, for government services, and we thought potentially banking. But the concern that is seen is very simple. Back in 2012, it was highlighted in a Grant Thornton report, and it clearly stated that if the government didn't continue working with the post office now, and what I mean by working with the post office is that ensuring that those government contracts within, for example, like the social welfare contract, which at the time was valued at 60 million, what it clearly said was, just 1 second, I believe my sound, I just put on there. I see there there's now, is that better? Is it sound better? Hello?
Yes.
Is that better now, is it? Okay, sorry about that. So basically in 2012, a document was formed by Grant Thornton. It came to the conclusion was that if government contracts reduced from 60 million, that our existing post office network would be in real trouble. And just imagine this now, right? We're now how many years ahead? We're in now 2021, and that contract is now going down to 51 million. So the government effectively has allowed the government contract business to reduce. Now, what has happened then, of course, is the viability of the network comes into question. So what happened again, another report was done, and from that, a contract was produced. And the idea of the contract was in 2018 that postmasters signed this new contract was going to ensure the security of their business going forward. Now, let's be clear, there are about 900 post offices. 603 postmasters signed that new contract. And how the post office works and how postmasters get paid is very simple. They only get paid per transaction. So the more transactions you do, the more you get paid. Now, the post office is older than the state.
The old contract that the post office used to be under was called the S52. And how that simply worked, same principle, you get paid per transaction. But the difference was the smaller offices, the rural offices, got paid more per transaction than the larger retail offices. And what that actually did was it maintained the network at the time over 1,000. What did the new contract do? It eliminated that contract. It put all postmasters, by the way, 300 now did not sign the new contract, 603 to sign this new contract that was, by the way, sold on the pretense to secure their future going forward. What has happened? Government contracts have now collapsed again because what's happening is we're going into what they call, as we all know, the cashless society. So my question was very clear, is that if it's a case that we require minimum 60 million government contracts, so they say, and overall 70 million to maintain a network sustainably, I would have thought that in any report that the first thing we would try to do was ring fence the monies required to ensure sustainable post office network. Now, we did research on our own behalf, and from that research we looked and we saw where actually banking was a way forward in conjunction with government, and that was achieved in New Zealand. In New Zealand at the time there was a political impasse. Their post office network was under threat, and what they decided to do was to create their own banking structure. And in that time then, what they decided to do was to ensure that the profits from their bank went back to their communities. So what happened in a very short space of time? Interest rates were more competitive for the general public. They gained, in the first 3 to 4 years of business, 400,000 new customers. Now keep in mind they actually have the same population as we in Ireland. And last year their customer base was over 986,000 customers, and they turned over a net profit of 100 million. So what we were saying today, Anne, is very clear. The difference is that the profits go back to the communities and not to stakeholders. Now, the problem that I see is that we as postmasters got out of the blue, no different to the public, that suddenly a new deal was done with Bank of Ireland. And the problem we feel with this is we and I as a postmaster right now cannot tell you how much a postmaster is going to get paid for doing that work. Is it going to achieve the revenue return that is required to maintain the network going forward? And, you know, the problem is that no one has that answer for us. What we got in a memo today was all that was said on the day that it was announced that this deal was done was that there was a strict non-disclosure agreement done within both the Bank of Ireland and An Post, and as stipulated by the bank. So in other words, the Pillar Bank is now controlling our network of post office. The postmaster, who is self-employed, dependent on new business to be sustainable, has no say, no input, and no idea. Now, the problem is this. And this is what I want to highlight and make it very clear to all. In 2008, when postmasters, and again to reiterate, signed up to new contract under the belief that they would have a new sustainable model, is now turning into a situation whereas as of June of this year, the subsidies that they were getting to maintain their business, part of that new contract for 3 years, is up. And they are now looking at a drop in income of anywhere between 30 and 50%. So we now have a network that's falling apart. And
okay. Yes, you have just given us a lot of information there, and I'm just going to try and unpack it and make sense of it for myself, and I suppose for the people that are watching. So
yes.
The first thing I want to ask you, the post office network is state-owned, I take it?
No, it's a semi-state, right? And it's a semi-state.
So it's semi-state owned. And each of the post offices then are run by a postmaster who
Correct.
is treated as somebody who is self-employed, and the revenue generated by the post office is dependent on the number of transactions. So
Correct.
The more transactions that you carry out, then the more of an income that you have, and that you had been largely dependent on state contracts in order to keep up that revenue stream. So people going along to the pension on going along to the post office on a Friday to collect their old age pension, me going to the post office the first Tuesday of the month to collect my children's allowance, and all of that. That generated revenue stream for you. But now with the cashless society, people are paid directly into their bank account. So that has more or less eliminated that revenue stream for you. Okay, am I right so far?
That is correct, Anna, yes.
Okay, so now we have a situation where the banks are closing down their branches right, left and centre all across the country. They have entered into a deal with the government, a secret deal that you are kept out of the loop and you don't know what that deal is, whereby you will become front of house agents for the banks. So correct. The bank will take the bank in Granite, for example. The Bank of Ireland Granite is in County Longford. I live in County Longford. So the Bank of Ireland in Granite is scheduled to shut down. And what will actually happen now is that the services provided by Bank of Ireland will now be available through the post office. But the postmaster in the bank in Granite is out of the loop. He doesn't know exactly how much he's going to be getting for carrying out that agency work for the bank. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct, Anna, and what has been said and leaked in the media that we are aware of, that we're now looking potentially at the contract being worth about 2.5 million to 890 post offices. So if you were to equate that in monetary value, you could possibly saying is that it could be between 1,000 and 2,000 per annum for doing all that work per post office. To me, I would say that doesn't seem like a good viable plan for the postmaster's business going forward. And that to me is a huge concern.
So really in simple terms, if we were to boil it down, what we have is the transfer of the post office system over to the banks to be used as their vassals, as it were, as their servants, to generate profits for the banks, and I suppose to put the people that are working in the post offices into a sort of bonded labour or bonded servitude. So, you know, as I said tonight, the spotlight is on the hidden giveaway of state assets, and this really is a classic example of the handover of our post offices to be used and to a certain extent abused by the banking sector.
What is disappointing, Anna, I suppose, is that there is a proven model, right, that, you know, community banking does work. But what it also would do is it would enable the network to be able to do other financial business where needed, whether it be online or at counter service. You know, we all have to ask this question. Why aren't, you know, every post office in the country the largest Argos in the country? You know, why don't we do local transactions and deals with local distributors within, for example, electrical goods, and have it delivered to your post office or from your post office? Because we do have that fleet. But the problem I keep coming back to is this. The government is aware of this, and let's be under no illusion. In 2016, I was personally the author of a motion that was brought to Dáil and was actually unanimously passed by every Dáil member, including our three ministers, Eamon Ryan, Michael McGrath and Pascal O'Donoghue. So here we ask to beg the question. This is coming. The problem is here. We're now looking at 600 potential offices not viable. A solution being proposed is a PSO, a public service obligation. The answer to the question is, well, if we could create a model that the communities would benefit from, and bear in mind, even in the banking market, if we were to achieve 20% of the market, right, in conjunction with credit unions, for example, that would be huge. But yes, it would create a viable network. It would still allow the pillar banks to have their 80%, but at least it would give the public an option of where they would like to do their business. But I will say this, and I think it's important, the technology within the network is second to none. You do a transaction in the GPO, you can do the very same inventory down in Kerry. So like, this is something that I believe very strongly about. If we want to keep, and you know, we're on about remote working, and this is a typical example of here tonight, where we can all meet, but yet in different locations. If we want that to succeed in Ireland, to have an equal quality of life, we need an infrastructure, and part of that is this. The post office within a shop allows you then to have that supermarket, the coffee shop, the local butcher, so that you have those facilities, the local school. But I will say this, up to now, government has deliberately ignored. But I think it's important that the public are aware. This is not a fault of we, the postmasters. As I say, we're older than the state. Many of the families that are there are family and friends of the communities. But we are not the ones that are not doing our best. The problem is the government. And I believe the Manager of Post, you know, should be really looking at how do we protect the existing post office that was there throughout the financial crisis in 2008. At the time in 2008, there was a crisis about money. We are aware of the ATMs. At that time, the public came to the local postmaster, would my money be safe within the post office? And the savings went from 14 billion at the time to over 19 billion. That figure currently is over 23 billion. Now, a recent report stated that if they were to consider setting up this so-called People Bank, it would cost approximately maybe 200 million. I would say this to everyone that's listening tonight, that if we said to the public that, by the way, there's 120 billion, I think, in the pillar banks in savings, and we're looking at 23 billion in the post office and billions again in our credit union. If we ask the public, well, would you like to contribute into something that would be a benefit to your family and your family's family going forward, I don't think we'd have any difficulty in getting that money to set this up. But that's the situation.
Okay, Tom, that is a really good point on which to end our discussion at this point. And his name escapes me, but the Fine Gael TD for County Longford is actually the postmaster in Ballinallee in County Longford. I just can't think of his name at the moment, and I'm quite shocked that he is not, you know, railing against this happening in government. Oh, his name completely escapes me. Yeah, so thank you so much, Tom, for that, and we will be back to you in the second half of the programme. So Seamus Maye is the chair of the International Small Business Alliance, and Seamus has been with us on Centre Ground before. You're very welcome back, Seamus. Seamus, I think your laptop might be muted, so maybe you could just unmute yourself there. Are you there? Yes, Seamus.
Now, good evening, everybody. Hello, Anna. Sorry about that.
Not at all, Seamus. You're very welcome back.
Thank you.
I suppose you wear several different hats. You were part of the Right to Homes group that were responsible for bringing that bill for the Dáil on affordable housing, and that group actually included the Master of the High Court, Edmund Honohan, and a number of others. You also have been part of the public banking group. So, you know, I'll just leave it over to yourself, Seamus, to introduce yourself to our viewers tonight, and you can tell them a little bit more about your background and what you're going to chat to us about.
Yeah, okay. Well, as well as those other areas that I've been involved in, I joined the Public Banking Forum of Ireland in 2014. Met a tremendous group of terribly well-informed people, and we've worked very hard on the entire banking issues ever since. I've been joint chair of that for the last few years. So, I mean, what Tom is speaking there, it makes a lot of sense. What we have to understand is that the ECB and the EU is driving us towards basically financial enslavement. There's over 4,000 banks have closed in Europe since we joined the euro. And, when we were bailed out, it was a condition of the bailout, both the condition that the Troika set down and also that the European authorities set down as a condition of the state aid, was that we had to bring competition into the market in Ireland. Now, we have not done that. In actual fact, competition has been eroded ever since the financial crash. And, we shouldn't think that the Ulster Bank exit is just a unilateral decision made in the UK by heads that said we're not making enough money. That's what they would like us to think, or that Ireland isn't a good place to make money. What is happening is bank consolidation. And the ECB are doing their best to consolidate banking across Europe. They just want one or two pillar banks in each country. So, there's a nice arrangement has been made whereby Ulster Bank conveniently exits the market. Now, I'll just move on because I want to say something about the Sparkassen, because the Sparkassen German public banking model is the most successful bank in the world. There are over 400 Sparkassen banks in Germany with 15,000 branches. And in addition to that, there's a further 1,000 community banks in Germany. Now, so people can see really what's going on. The pillar banks in Germany, the equivalent of AIB and Bank of Ireland would be Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank. Now, these banks have 12.5% of the German market. The rest of the market is held by German public banks owned by the people and by community banks, which are more or less cooperative banks. So what did we do in Ireland to boost competition? Well, let's just look at, before I go on to that, let's look at interest rates. We're paying in Ireland, and don't forget, we're in the single market, or we're supposed to be. We all know about insurance costs, etc. But we're paying up to 5 times and more than 5 times the interest rates that our colleagues or our counterparts in Germany are paying. Up to 5 times. Now, back a couple of years ago, we did some figures on a typical mortgage, Germany versus Ireland, and the cost of the house we took it at 315,000, and we took a 10% deposit, and we had, I think, 285,000 of a mortgage. Now, over the lifetime, 30 years of that mortgage, the German mortgage holder is paying 121,000 euros less for their house. 121,000. That's the extent and the scale of the rip-off of Irish bank rates here in Ireland. And that's why it's so essential that we bring competition into the market. Now, Ulster Bank are going, and let's look at what's happening with the post offices. And I said earlier today on the radio that An Post and the Irish Postmasters Union have been playing loose and fast with post offices, with postmasters, postmistresses, and indeed with the general public. And Tom alluded to it earlier. He talked about the 2018 contract that was given to postmasters, many of whom signed, I think maybe about 600 signed. Now, that contract can only be described as a contract to insolvency. That's where it was going to end up. And we called it at the time, and we called it ever since, and now that is where it actually is. The post offices, that network is looking for immediate 17 million per year just to keep it going. And, we're hearing about post offices for a good few years now. What is wrong? Well, I'll tell you what's wrong. What's wrong is the business model. The business model that the post offices are following is obsolete. And the simple way to make the post offices profitable, and if the government wanted to do so, they could do it in the morning, is to grant the post offices a license, a banking license. Now, this deal that was announced on Monday of this week with Bank of Ireland going to sell their wares through the post offices, that basically means that the post offices are going to be agents. It's going to be an agency bank. So they're selling a car loan for AIB or a car loan or a mortgage for Bank of Ireland, whatever it is. But the money and the profits are being sucked out of each and every local economy via the post office, and into the hands of these massive, giant corporate banks. Now, if we do, again, what Tom alluded to, if we copy the New Zealand model, it was 2002 when the Kiwi Bank was created from the Kiwi Post Office for the very same reasons as what we're talking about here in Ireland. If we do that, the post offices would be lending their own money or creating their own credit. And the profits would be going back to the post offices, back to the exchequer, and hopefully back in some way or other back to each and every community in Ireland. It's chalk and cheese. So the government, by allowing this Bank of Ireland deal, for example, to go forward, and Pascal Donoghue always can't do anything about it when it doesn't suit him. But this is contrary to competition law. We are consolidating the market. We're taking out a competitor. We're not actually buying the post offices, so to say, well, we're not buying them, but we're doing this deal. Now, very interestingly, Bank of Ireland did a similar deal with the post offices in the UK some years ago. And that has worked. There's no question about it. That has worked very well for the bank, but not for anybody else. Now, there was a study done by Cass Business School as part of London City University by a very renowned professor there, and the study found that the partnership between Bank of Ireland and the post offices in the UK has not delivered the expected and potential results for the post office. That establishing a state-owned UK post bank would ensure the long-term sustainability of the post office by diversifying its portfolio activities and increasing revenues, and that this would rebalance the UK economy away from London and the other major urban centres, and it would advance financial inclusion by reaching those who do not use banking services or who are likely to be affected by local bank closures. And that establishing a post bank is an opportunity for the post office to build on its current strength, including the positive public perception of the post office brand compared to financial institutions. And finally, that a post bank would improve access to finance for SMEs. It could also join forces with challenger banks specializing in SME lending and acquire new technology to make sure that lending and related risks are managed prudently and sustainably. So they made a mistake in the UK. They've been advised now to break up the partnership. That's what the university, the report is saying, break up this partnership. So why should we go down this road and basically take the post office network is a prized asset of this state, of each and every one of us. And why should we allow the pillar banks, this case Bank of Ireland, to just capture the system? And they'll capture the network, and they will use postmasters, postmisters basically as slave labor, because there's nobody in this country wants to take over the post office from their father or their mother or their aunt or whoever it is, because it's not viable, while the pillar banks are paying all kinds of bonuses out to their staff. So like we have got to bring competition into the economy. And Tom was talking earlier about the motion that was passed, and this is in November 2016, a very comprehensive motion in Dáil and passed unanimously. And there's a lot of points in it, but it said one of the things was to implement a new community banking service operated by An Post to be made available in all post offices throughout the country. This post community bank could be based on either the New Zealand Kiwi model or the German Sparkassen model, both of which have been found to be valid models. That was unanimously passed in November of 2016, and yet to this day nothing has been done on it. And just before I finish, there's a couple of points, Anna. The interest rates at the moment, we're experiencing something we never did ever before, negative interest rates. The ECB has a negative interest rate of -0.5, and the pillar banks here have negative interest rates. And that means that, for example, the credit unions, who by law, they have to deposit a huge portion of their deposits with the pillar banks, and they're actually paying the banks to hold their money. They're getting a negative interest rate, so it's costing them money. And as a result, the credit unions don't want your money, or they don't want my money, because it's costing them. So if it's costing them, why can their money, they have 13, 14 odd billion in deposits, why can't their money be used to fund a bank, either their own bank or a post bank, post office bank, or a joint venture? There's a number of ways of doing this. And they could get away, they could charge literally 1.5% for money, or 2%. And in Germany, that's what the interest rates are. People are paying for car loans and for house loans and everything else. They're paying around about 1%, sometimes 1.25%, 1.5%, sometimes under 1%. And we can do that here. But you see, the reason the government don't want to hear about it is because it's a threat to the pillar banks. And Tom mentioned about the market shares. Well, like what we in the Public Banking Forum believe is that the Post Office Bank can take approximately 20% of the market. And I know we're not here to discuss credit unions tonight, but the credit unions can indeed take another 20% or 25%. That will leave the pillar banks with a dominant position in the Irish market. They will still have over 50%.
Okay, Seamus, there's a huge amount there to unpack, but I suppose quite simply for somebody like myself who finds it difficult to grasp the world of finance, what I'm hearing is that in Germany they have a public banking system that accounts for most of the banking in Germany. It is public banks, a network right throughout Germany, offering cheap credit to people, and all of the profits then being channeled back into the local community. And a similar model, the Kiwi model, exists in New Zealand. But here in Ireland, no. We have a corrupt government, and I call it a corrupt government, that is blocking a similar system from being established in this country that would enable cheap banking at a local level, where the profits will be channeled back into local areas. And you mentioned that statistic there that a German homeowner pays €124,000 less in interest over the lifetime of his mortgage than his Irish counterpart. And it just gives you, I suppose, a small clue as to how much the ordinary people of Ireland are being exploited financially. So thank you so much for that, Seamus. Huge.
Just one point on it is very, very important. The German model, the Sparkassen public banks, they do not lend for speculation. They lend for productive purposes. And it's no coincidence that Germany is by far Europe's strongest and biggest economy and the fourth largest economy in the world. Because they have their banking system right, they haven't capitulated to powerful banks like every other country has. And the ECB is making it very difficult for the Sparkassen to survive, because they're making it very difficult for any of these small banks to survive. So I'll leave it over to you. We'll be coming back to it in a minute, I presume.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Seamus. And now, later than normal, because I just could not stop these men in full flow, because what they had to say was just so important and needed to be said and needs to be heard, and we need to learn. Waiting quietly in the wings, as always, is Dr. Peter Dunn with the hot topic of the week from mainstream media. You're very welcome, Peter.
Thanks very much, Anna. And again, like yourself, completely intrigued, fascinated, and staggered and appalled by some of the revelations that our guests have gone through there this evening. I suppose it's nothing new. Thus has it always been. So, we've always had our, just looking at some of my notes here, we've always had our, we tend to think of Latin American banana republics and comprador capitalism, but we've always had our own variant domestically here, much the same as we have our own nomenclatura class in the state bureaucracy. Just on that, a very good book that I would maybe point viewers towards in terms of the historical context, the relatively recent historical context in the last 200 years of this, would be Conor McCabe, Sins of the Father. So when you read that book, you realize that what we've heard about tonight essentially is just it's the long arc, the latest iteration of the long arc of history and how we've actually been treated, you know, regardless of independence and so on and so forth. My own particular, in terms of asset stripping the state, my own particular I'll say fascination, but my own particular concern has always been with the fishing industry. And the seminal work I think that people should read in that regard is by Harry Brown from 2008 in the Dublin Review. Probably the most detailed assessment. And actually, Finbar, who's with us this evening, had a very good interview with Thomas Pringle on the Irish Inquiry channel quite recently. And again, I'd urge people, I learned sort of one or two details that I wasn't aware of. And I mean, I've lived in I've been reared in the fishing industry, and I wasn't aware of one or two of those details. So that surprised me. So that was an extremely good interview. Just to come back to something Finbar said as well, because, you know, you'll have the naysayers perhaps tuning in. Like Finbar, I've a PhD. I've probably made that point before. So I'm not necessarily expert in any of the areas that I'm discussing. But having a PhD, and Finbar can attest to this, you know, I tend to approach any of the topics in as much as I can covering the show here with a sense of an attitude of academic rigor. So rigor and academic training and those tenets of academic training, like attention to detail and so on. And I know I've probably, you know, missed some fact checking on one or two, for example, tweets. Quite recently I corrected a tweet. It's very important to get details correct. So again, in terms of citizen journalism, you know, we are, I suppose, where the mainstream should be, if I could just make that point. Another point, I jotted down some notes, Anna, as I want to do, and following Finbar's contribution there, and he said it, I mean, you know, just as I was writing it down, Margaret Thatcher in the 80s in Britain introduced the right to buy scheme for public housing, realizing, you know, as she did at the time, that to build a stable society you need to give ordinary people, you need a strong, stable middle class. You need people who feel that they have a stake in the society. And what we're hearing tonight is running completely contrary to that, and it's a complete betrayal of that model by the political class. And again, before I come to this week's hot topic question, Anna, as I want to do, I did a little bit of Googling on, it's a subject which I know is close to Seamus's heart, legal corruption. And I came across an academic paper by Kaufman and Vicente from 2005, and it dealt with legal corruption. And they go through their abstract, and then they introduce their topic with a little anecdote at the start. And maybe I'll go through that. It's very quick. The quote reads, "Are all dinner menus here the same?" asked a key aide to Menem, the Argentinian president during the 90s, to the chef of the presidential residence. So that's in reference to Carlos Menem, who was the then Argentinian president. And the chef replied, "The menus change, presidents change. What never changes is the dinner guests." And that was the retort of the chef, referring to the cadre of businessmen who frequented the residence. So that brings me, without further ado, Anna, to this week's hot topic question. And this week we've seen the former French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, sentenced to 3 years in prison, including 2 suspended, after a Paris court found him guilty of corruption and influence peddling. Sarkozy, who maintained his innocence and will appeal, is the second French leader under the Fifth Republic to be convicted after leaving office. The late Jacques Chirac was handed a suspended jail sentence in 2011 for misusing public funds by hiring fictitious employees during his earlier stint as Paris mayor. Now, I did have one thought when I read about his 2 year suspended, and his 1 year, I think, which he's allowed to serve under house arrest. And I did think, funnily enough, how is that very much different from what we've engaged here in the last year in the Republic of Ireland with, I think, 163 days in lockdown. So, you know, obviously it is merely symbolic, the conviction. But in light of those developments, this week's hot topic question is, what are the odds of an Irish politician being convicted of corruption.
Okay, so I bring you in first, Finbar, to give us your thoughts on that question.
Okay, first of all, just to clarify, I was actually saying that Margaret Thatcher was bad enough, but this bill is, even she would be ashamed to take it in, so I won't. There. In terms of Irish politicians, I think Irish politicians, absolutely, yes, I can envisage them being jailed, but it depends what colour and what party and what their beliefs are. We saw a couple of years ago, while there was an actual minister avoiding checkpoints, driving away from checkpoints over the limit, to create a deflection from that actual fact. Around Christmas a few years ago, Claire Daly, TD at the time, was stopped and breathalyzed, and the media went, this was announced by An Gardaí to the media. And so instead of the media putting their cameras on the minister, who was guilty of the accusation, Claire Daly was run through the mill to be proven completely innocent. So yes, even in government, I can see conditions in which government ministers would be jailed if there was an election tomorrow in which there was a real democratic swing towards people-centred governance and parties and individuals. I can see that government, the powers that be, both in secret services, etc., doing their damnedest to create falsified criminal accusations against those. So yes, I can, but I can't see Fine Gael and I can't see Fianna Fáil ministers being jailed easily.
Okay, Finbar, thank you for that. Tom, do you have any thoughts on this question about the jailing of corrupt politicians in Ireland? Do you think it could happen? Is Tom there?
Muted.
Is Tom?
Okay.
Tom, you have
Yeah,
your
can you hear me now? Yeah.
Tom?
No.
Tom, can you hear us now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. To answer the question, is anything possible? Absolutely. But it's in time, and it's like everything, it's all in the history. Once it's on print, and the idea, of course, is to go through that print in detail. Decisions are being made now, and it's scary to think that it's down the line that we see the repercussions of all those. And the one thing that's very important for all of us to learn from is that we do not forget when it's on print. At some stage, questions will be asked. But the one thing that's very important here is open discussion and to analyze. Now, yes, we are not all correct, and yes, we will make mistakes. But I can assure one thing is, when there is decisions made that have major impacts and we see beneficiaries down the line, that's the key. For example, if we're saying about the property, it's not about the first deal that's done. It could be the second or third deal down the line that we'd have to realize that's where the rules came from. So is there a possibility? I would think so, yes. But I would say to many people, they've got to be careful.
Right, Tom. Thank you for that. And finally, over to you, Seamus. Do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Well, I do indeed. It's a topic that I'm very well acquainted with. And I just need to draw, show the difference between what we talk about, or what Peter talked about there, legal corruption and raw naked corruption, as I call it. Now, we all remember and have heard of the Moriarty Tribunal and the Moriarty Report. Well, the Moriarty Tribunal found that there was endemic and systemic corruption in Irish political life, and it exposed corrupt and inappropriate payments from business people to politicians. It said corruption affected every level of government in the decade up to the late 90s, from some holders of top ministerial offices to some local councillors. It found that its existence was widely known and tolerated. And while this corruption was occasionally investigated or subject to adverse comment, those involved operated with a justifiable sense of impunity and invincibility. And that's the problem. And the one thing that we need to do before we is introduce accountability. We simply don't hold public officials to account in this country. There is no such thing as accountability. But there's another problem, and an even bigger problem. That's for raw naked corruption. But the bigger problem, and the problem that's costing us a lot more than raw naked corruption, is what Peter just mentioned, is legal corruption. And legal corruption, again, the Kaufman and Vincent paper defines it as it takes many forms and includes cronyism, patronage, and state capture, when powerful groups manipulate policy formation to serve their own interests rather than the public interest. And that's legal. And that's what's happening. The parties are run by a whip system, and the leaders of the parties are being lobbied. There's 40,000 lobbies in Brussels, as we know, and there's huge amount of lobbying goes on in Ireland. And our leaders need to start listening to the public interest and stop listening to the corporate lobbyists. And until that culture changes, we won't see a politician or any other public servant in prison. And possibly there should be public servants in prison for the overrun and the way they manage the National Children's Hospital, just for starters.
Yes, so I think that is, I suppose, a very salient point on which to end our discussion tonight and our programme. We put the spotlight on the hidden handover of state assets, and I think that there is, I suppose, a huge amount to unpack from tonight's programme. I know that I will certainly be looking back over the programme again tomorrow, because just to learn more, because I wasn't able to pick up everything as it was being told to us. Just the level of content that has been given to us tonight by our three guests and by Peter. So yes, maybe Peter, I will give you a final word.
Oh, thanks very much, Anna. I think there is a bigger picture here. I referred a couple of weeks ago, Anna, to a book which I just finished, actually, which was written by the anthropologist Jason Hickel, and it was Less is More. And it was essentially, the topic of the book was degrowth. So he's talking essentially about almost a pathological condition of capitalism, which is extractivist, which doesn't really have any bounds placed on it, and which others, like for example Richard Heinberg, who's a proponent of peak oil, have likened to some kind of doomsday machine. And really what particularly when Finbar was talking, I was minded of one of the essential conditions of the capitalism that we've come to recognize, and that was enclosure and the enforcing of an artificial scarcity. So that really smacks of what we are seeing. There's a very capable gentleman, a Dr. Simon Michaud, that's spelled Michaux, and I think it's pronounced Michaud. He's a physicist and a geologist. He's a mining and hydrogeology expert, and he has some very good content on YouTube. He's also obviously an academic and a published author. And when I saw yesterday's decision vis-a-vis the constitutional challenge by Gemma O'Doherty and John Waters, I was minded of something that he said near one of the end of one of his talks. And he said that, and the context was that, make no mistake, we are in the early stages of a civilizational collapse. And if you will, let's call them capitalist interests, know this, are becoming desperate to sort of get, what I would call squeeze it to the pips, to really get the last juice, as it were, and what we will transition into will be something more akin to neo-feudalism. But Michaud made a point, and I was reminded of it when I saw yesterday's decision, and he said that social contracts really everywhere, or what we thought were social contracts, and you can think in terms of constitutional law and so on. He said that social contracts are likely to be revoked and rewritten in the context of collapsing societies. He said that in 2015, and that seems to have been a very prescient comment on it.
Okay, thank you for that, Peter. And I'm going to go back to each of our three guests just for a final word or two to what they would like to impress upon viewers tonight. So, Finbar, if you're there.
What I'd say to viewers is, final word, whether you consider the moment there are things happening that we need to pay attention to and we need to take immediate action on. You may disagree with other people in terms of social issues, abortion, gay rights, whatever it is, but it's time that we started to get together around a common platform, or we're all going to be left standing naked in the rain. And that's the way it's going to be. So I know there's a lot of detail come out tonight. If we can all make a commitment to each other to let's, in the next few months, get it together and have a campaign that's going to stop what is the sell-off. And you described this show 100% right. It's the secret giveaway of the state. That's all. And thank you. Thanks to your viewers as well, by the way.
Thank you, Finbar. Tom, a final word from you.
Well, I suppose, and to leave it like this, in New Zealand in 2012, they took a stand and they now have a bank that's creating wealth for local communities. Can that be done in this country? I believe so. One thing we watch is the problems the network is happening within weeks would be very clear there is a solution. And let's try and get that solution over the line. Thank you.
Very, very positive note there. And Seamus, a final word from you.
Yes, and I'll stick to the core issue I was talking about tonight, which is finance and that. And I believe that we have a vast potential for our Indigenous economy. There are literally thousands of products, thousands and thousands of areas we can go into, but we cannot do it with the large banks alone. We need public banking, and we have to start with the post office. And I would appeal to all the postmasters and all the postmistresses to get together and to find out what's really going on. An Post doesn't own the network. The network is ours. We are the taxpayers and we own it. And we want to help the postmasters to help themselves, but also to help communities. When we're finished there, we'll move on to the credit unions and public banking. There's a lot of work to be done to sort of bring about some balance in our socio-economy.
Thank you so much, Seamus. And thankfully, we have ended there on quite a positive note. To you, our viewers who have been watching to the end, I want to thank you very much for doing so. I think tonight's programme has been very, very enlightening, that there is moves afoot to hand over the final state assets to a private entity known as the Land Development Agency, that our concept of social housing and council houses is no more. The new concept is that that private companies will have equity in our private homes if we want to get a loan. And what is happening to our post offices is bordering on criminal. They're becoming front of house agencies for the pillar banks that are operating here in this country. And of course, Seamus then spoke to us about what is happening in the country as regards bureaucracy and state capture. I suppose the really positive note that I'm picking up from all of this is that the first thing that we can do is to make ourselves aware and informed of what is actually happening, and then once we're informed, it's time to take action. And if we take action, the blueprint is there to create great wealth for the people of this country. But that won't happen unless we inform ourselves and take action. I just want to finish now by thanking Stephen and his team tonight, Connor and Ciara, who have assisted him for making this broadcast possible. We'll be back again next Wednesday night at the same time of 9 o'clock on Centre Ground. And I invite you to share this programme, and in so doing, we can get word out to a much wider audience of what is actually happening in the country. People don't know what's happening. So until we meet again, Bannock Day or If Galair.